It's good to see all of you this morning. It looks a little dreary out there, but I guess we'll just take it like it comes. It could be worse. It could be snow out there, which my kids left last Monday to go up to St. Joe, and they got the other side of St. Louis, and they had snow 2 to 4 inches most of the way. Uh, but anyway, we'll count our blessings. I'll take the little bit of mist and rain. I don't want any snow and ice for sure. We are in the 12th chapter of 2nd Corinthians. If you'd like to be turning there, what has Paul been doing as we are going through the 11th chapter of 2nd Corinthians? What has he been doing? He's been boasting, hasn't he? He says he's going to be foolish, but he's going to do it. Uh, he is confronting these false apostles that have come in claiming that they're on a higher plane than Paul is, that he's not a legitimate apostle, and they're trying to do all sorts of bragging and this sort of thing. And so he's just laying it out as far as his life is concerned. They can't compare to him. And he even made the point that he had preached to them and had not taken any money. It had been free of charge to them, all that he had done for them. And he said he was glad he did it, and he was going to continue doing that. And that was one thing that these false apostles were not willing to do. They were not willing to preach the gospel free of charge, like Paul was doing that. He goes on in chapter 12, and there really didn't need to be a break here. You know that the verses and the breaks were actually done by man. That's not in the original text. And it's a continuation of the same idea that he's continuing. He starts out by saying it is doubtless not profitable. In other words, there's nothing to be gained by him doing what he's doing by way of boasting. But he says, I want to move on to something else. And by way of comparing himself to these false apostles, he says, I will come to visions and to revelations of the Lord. What do you think he might be referencing here by visions and revelations?
Paradise.
Pardon?
Paradise.
Well, that's what he's going to be talking in this context. The visions that he's going to be mentioning has to do with being caught up into paradise. But had he already received any visions? On the road to Damascus, wouldn't you call his confrontation with Jesus a form of vision, surrounded by this bright, bright light? So he's certainly talking about that. How the Lord appeared to him after that and made uh, the revelation to him concerning his life, I don't know. We don't know. It may have been in a series of visions. It may have been like Paul watching a video. You know, we think about videos and movies. And Paul may very well have had that kind of visions where he heard Jesus giving the Sermon on the Mount. He saw him performing the miracles that he performed. That would all certainly be possible. And so he's referencing the fact that he has been the recipient of very special visions and revelations from the Lord. He starts there in verse 2 saying, I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago, uh, one of the commentaries said, in saying, I know a man is like saying, this is me. I'm talking about myself. And we know that's exactly what he's doing. And he says that 14 years ago, this took place. And he says, whether in the body, I know not, or whether out of the body, I do not know. God knows. Such a one was caught up to the third heaven. I wish we had some way of knowing exactly, but I have a feeling that if we were to go back 14 years from when he's writing this, what do you think he would have, where would it have ended up?
Or he's left for
What?
dead.
Right. I believe I agree, and I think that's exactly what he's referencing. And this happened in Lystra. If we were to go back over into Acts 14 verses 19 to 20, we'd have the record there how that the Jews came from Iconium and Antioch of Pisidia. They followed him. The ones that were opposed to him, opposed his teachings, were the Judaizers, and they stirred the people up in Lystra. And the people they're stirring up were not Jews. These were the people that actually tried to worship Paul and Barnabas after they'd healed this person, claiming that they were gods come to earth. But these Jews stirred them up to such a point that they took Paul and they stoned him.
So you think that's the reason at the time of his being stoned is the reason he wasn't, how should I put it, had himself enough to know the things that was transpiring at that time?
Very, very likely. He was to such a point that they thought he was dead.
Some people think that
They left him for dead. In what state he was, as far as his physical and mental capacity, he certainly would be incapacitated. And he's saying here, when he saw this vision, that he was not aware whether he was in the body or out of the body. He did not realize whether he was still alive physically or not. What is it?
Oh, I was just saying there's some people think that he did die.
Well, I think he was at the point that he was close enough to it that he has this vision anyway. I certainly believe that this is the occasion he's referencing there. And in this state, again, he repeats in verse 3, I'm not aware of whether this was in the body or out of the body. Only God knows. He says, this person was caught up into paradise. And there he heard inexpressible words, which it is not lawful for man to utter. So whatever he was made aware of in this state and in this vision, it was things that either he could not put in human language or it was forbidden for him to repeat. We have people today who claim to have gone, to have died and come back. And they want to tell about it. They want to tell what they saw and this sort of thing.
One time, what I thought about experiences. And I didn't really, it was a lady.
Yeah.
And I didn't know exactly what she was thinking about. And I said, well, if you believe the Bible, it says it's appointed unto man once to die, and after that, the judgment. I said, I don't think that you died and then came back.
Yeah.
And it didn't, evidently that was an answer maybe that he needed.
We have examples of people being raised from the dead. Lazarus is one, but we don't have any record of him telling anything about what happened after he died. We have Samuel coming back to talk to Saul. He did not come back to a bodily. I mean, he was not like Lazarus, there where he came back to life. And we have many examples, but we have no reference to any of them describing what happened or what they saw. No.
Ceasing of the miracles.
Now, I've read books and I've saw stuff where people they thought they were up above their spirit or something. They were looking down,
Looking down on them. Yes, I've read that too.
Read that, and I still Stephen was my wife's grandpa, Mr. Jim Bowen, when he passed away in the hospital. When he was passing away in the hospital, he nearly died. He looked up in the corner, and I've never seen such a smile on a man's face in my life.
Yeah.
Now he saw something. I don't know what he saw.
Right.
I know what I saw.
Right.
So you,
Well, you have people who have been close to death who talk about seeing a light. I've seen that. I mean, I've read that, and this sort of thing.
When they die, there's something you can't explain.
that's right.
Is just happen.
Right.
And even still reaching. He was trying to take somebody's hand, or he was trying to reach for a light.
Right.
He was literally the lady dying, reaching up.
Right.
And what's none of us can
No,
say,
we don't know.
but
We don't know. Right. Right. Right.
There's many instances too of people going into cardiac arrest, heart stop. That happens every day.
Right.
I don't know at what point, they a lot of them have been brought back, a lot of them haven't. But I don't know at what point that person actually dies. But
Right.
I mean, there's instances all the time of cardiac arrest and
Right.
electrocutions,
Well,
heart stop.
I know that when Dot was taken off the respirator after she had her massive stroke, uh, she lived for probably 30, 40 minutes. She'd been on the respirator all day and had no response. She was, I believe, brain dead at that point. Uh, but when the spirit left her body, I assume was when she stopped breathing for the last time.
that we have what people when they die to see how much the spirit.
Oh my.
Just the last few days about that this was a nurse. She said she had actually weighed them, said it wasn't much, but there was a negligible difference.
And they have explained with this. Listen, as messed up as human beings have been in our experimentation of things, you don't think they've done some of this stuff?
Yeah. Right.
And they wave at death. That's
Right. 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 That's exactly right, Chris. Whatever occurs, that's something we won't know until it's our turn to go, I suppose. Uh, right. Right. And I know that our mind has capabilities that we're not even aware of.
More than
Uh,
we realize.
right. And I don't know what you think about hypnosis, but I know that under hypnosis, some very strange things can happen, and things can remember things from way, way back that without it they can't bring to their memory. Uh,
in-law. When he was in junior high school, his uncle was sick, struggling, something. So now my father-in-law was born in 1950, so you can imagine when this was. This is way back then.
yeah.
For me, it was way back then. Some of y'all might not know.
It was kind of after I'd been born about 10 years, but go ahead.
With his uncle. And the uncle was hypnotized. And he said, when I'm the practitioner, whatever he was, he says, I'm going to take out a pack of cigarettes and pull a cigarette out of this pack. And when I do, you're going to immediately start coughing to the point that you can't catch your breath. And you're going to beg me not to light this cigarette. And woke him up, and he did it. He pulled the pack out of his pocket,
pulled the cigarette out. Mike said the uncle started coughing and begged him not to light the cigarette. This guy was a chain smoker.
Yeah.
And this must have been some of the methodology to try to get him to quit smoking. I don't know. But I literally asked my father-in-law, what did you think when that happened? And he said, I thought I didn't know what I was seeing, but I was seeing something. You know? I mean, how do you explain that? But
It happens. When I was in college and I was leading singing at this little Bradford congregation, one of the members were a man and woman named Falwell, and they had a daughter. And that's how she had her baby, was under hypnosis, was fully awake, but felt no pain. So yeah, there's some strange things that can happen as far as our mind is concerned. But
I've always said our mind is more powerful than we'll ever really realize.
that's exactly right. I believe that. And I would hope part of what someone may be feeling when they leave this earth, if they have been centered on God and Christ and uh, knew they have heaven to look forward to, I think that would be the last thing that would be on their mind, don't you? I remember when my dad got close to his dad, he said, "I'm ready to go." And I mean, it was a point that he was looking forward to that. Of course, he was 90 years old. He'd had a long life, too. Yeah, right. That's exactly right. But whatever, we know that Paul is the one person that is referencing the only record that we have of someone who went to that extent that they were caught up into paradise. And I wished he could have described it, don't you? It would have been wonderful for us to be able, but uh, he was not allowed to do that. It was forbidden for him to do that. He says, "Of such a one I will boast, yet of myself I will not boast." In other words, he's giving this as reference that he is special, that he doesn't have to take a back seat to any of these false prophets. But he said, "I'm not going to be bragging about this. This is nothing. This is nothing that I can claim of myself that I've earned, that I have any reason to boast." He said, I'm not going to do that. He says, "For though I might desire to boast, I will not be a fool, for I will speak the truth, but I refrain lest anyone should think of me above what he sees me to be or hears from me." Uh, this would set him apart, wouldn't it? And if he gloried in this and he boasted about it and he made it known this, I think, and then he's saying people might look at him and put him on a pedestal and say, yeah. And he did not want that. In fact, he goes on, and this is interesting. He says, "And lest I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of the revelations, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I be exalted above measure." So we don't have to question anymore who he's talking about. I mean, he just comes out and says, this occurred to me. But he also then points out that he was given a thorn in the flesh. And uh, there's some different ideas that's been put forth, and these are conjectures. They're just some ideas that are put forth. Um, you have one idea that he has an eye problem. And this may have come from the blinding light that he saw on the road to Damascus. This may have been a residual effect, even though his sight was restored. It may have been that he was left with a condition that caused him to have problems with his sight. Um, the second is that he suffered an injury that was not completely corrected from the stoning that he received, and that could certainly well be. You can imagine, we can't really imagine, but being hit with rocks to the point that they think you're dead. You would think there would be broken bones, the skull might have been crushed, bruises and punctures all over your body. It would not have been a pretty sight, would it?
We hear a lot of talk about executions, as in Alabama using
Right.
gas. But that would be one of the painfulest, worst deaths a man, I believe,
Yeah.
could go through.
Right.
It's just one stone at a time.
He talks about in Galatians, and I want us to take the time to turn over there, if you will, to Galatians chapter 4. And I want us to look at verses 13 through 15. That's Galatians 4, verses 13 through 15. And this is one of the passages that lends support or maybe thinking that it is something to do with his eyes. Here you have him saying, "You know that because of physical infirmity, I preached the gospel to you at the first. And my trial, which was in my flesh, you did not despise or reject, but you received me as an angel of God, even as Christ Jesus. What then was the blessing you enjoyed? For I bear you witness that if possible, you would have plucked out your own eyes and given them to me." And with him making that comment, that's where people come up with the idea that his thorn in the flesh, the affliction that he had to do something to do with his eyes and his eyesight. When he says that he entered there because of sickness into Galatia, or preached to them in this condition, the congregations of the church that are in the province of Galatia would have been Antioch of Pisidia, Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe. It's in Lystra that he was stoned. Now you find out that when he arouses and the brethren take him back in, and whatever they do to help him get back on his feet, he leaves there and he goes to Derbe. He preaches, and then he comes back and goes back to Lystra and back to these very congregations that he'd already preached at. And that may very well be what he's referencing as far as when he preached to them, that he had a physical malady. He was sick, or he had been injured. And that may very well be what he's talking about. I'm not for sure. Uh, we're not going to know what that thorn in the flesh is, whether it was some sort of a disability that he had, maybe a physical disability, some sort of crippling malady, or whether it was something to do with his eyes. We just have these indications. Whatever it was something that was very unpleasant for him. It made it difficult for him, and he prayed that it might be removed from him. This idea of being a messenger from Satan, does that bring to mind anything at all? His physical disability, this thorn in the flesh, this thing that was with him that he wanted to get rid of, whatever was painful or was a disability, but it was a messenger from Satan. Does that bring to mind anything?
Could be the way he treated Christians before.
Well, that may be, and may have brought to his mind that he'd caused suffering. What it brings to my mind is Job, the book of Job, because what is explained and described as far as Job is concerned? He was put at the disposal of Satan to do with him what he wanted to. And what did that involve? All the horrible things that happened to him. The pain. What, pardon?
Anything shy of death.
Right, right. And so he had a messenger from Satan, didn't he? In a very real way. Do you have anything in the New Testament that also repeats that idea? Can you think of anything? If you will go to Luke chapter 13, let's take the time to do that, because there's an interesting thing there. In Luke chapter 13, verses 10 through 17, let's look at that. It says, "Now he was teaching," this is Jesus, "in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. And behold, there was a woman who had a spirit of infirmity 18 years, and was bent over and could in no way raise herself up. But when Jesus saw her, he called her to him and said to her, 'Woman, you are loosed from your infirmity.' And he laid his hands on her, and immediately she was made straight and glorified God. But the ruler of the synagogue answered with indignation, because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath. And he said to the crowd, There are 6 days on which men ought to work. Therefore come and be healed on them, and not on the Sabbath day. The Lord then answered him and said, Hypocrite, does not each one of you on the Sabbath loose his ox or donkey from the stall and lead it away to water it? So ought not this woman, being a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan hath bound, think of it, 18 years he loosed from his bond on the Sabbath. So here again, you have a reference of her being bound by Satan. Maybe we need to change our perception as far as the trials and tribulations we experience in this life. Too many of us want to say, why did God let this happen? It's a part of the world that we live in, and who is the ruler of this world? It's Satan. He's behind every bad thing that happens, people. We are visited by Satan in this way. The things that are bad that happen are the consequences of sin in the realm in which we live. Now, I'm not saying that we suffer. We've already pointed out, Jesus teaches that we're not punished immediately because of sin and this sort of thing. Although some sin has consequences. A person can ruin their bodies by abusing substance like alcohol and drugs and this sort of thing. When someone drinks to the point that they destroy their liver and have sclerosis of the liver, that's a consequence of their sinful lifestyle.
Job didn't suffer because he was sinful. He suffered because he was. I mean, Satan's coming after you when you're doing what's right, not what.
Right. He was suffering because of his connection with God and his allegiance to God. He was totally innocent of sin like that. Now, he was not a sinless person, but he was not being punished for anything that he did. And the same thing happens today.
That's is to make you as a Christian think that you shouldn't suffer.
Right. Right.
Peter would say.
Right.
When does a husband need to be cautious of women?
All the time. Right. That's right. That's right. That's an exclusive relationship. It does not allow for any others. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. There are so many false ideas in the world today, and one goes with the idea that if you're a Christian, you oughtn't suffer at all. I'm going to become a Christian, or I'm going to do this, and I'm going to get good from God because of that. That's not the way it operates at all. And certainly this is pointed out. But I thought it was interesting and important for us to actually see uh, this in the life of Paul. And whatever he's talking about, this thorn in the flesh, a splinter, is one translation. It was painful, uh, but it was given to him, he says, so that he would not be exalted above measure.
It might have been shame.
Well, that would certainly be a thorn in the flesh. By the way, remember Jerry in your prayers. He's got a bad case of shingles that go halfway around his body, from around his navel all the way to the middle of his back. And they're bad enough that they're blistering up, and that's extremely painful. So keep him in your prayers. And that's certainly a thorn in the flesh and a visit of Satan for sure.
I've got a thorn in my flesh too. It's right there in my thumb. It's a splinter probably back there.
Oh, okay. So you know exactly what kind of pain he's talking about. Paul was certainly not one to be exalted in and of himself, was he? Uh, he downplayed everything that he could actually have used to build himself up. I mean, he's going through this, but then at the same time, he's saying, "I'm being foolish." And now this is not something that he ought to even have to do, and he doesn't enjoy doing it. But on this occasion, he felt like it was important because it was like these Corinthians were weighing him against these false apostles. And they needed to have the facts. If they were going to make some sort of a value judgment, comparing him with these as to who they ought to be accepting and hearing, he really didn't have a choice. And yet at the same time, it comes through that he did not like having to do that.
Have somewhat disadvantage because he hasn't been writing them all that pleasantly.
No, that's true.
And now these guys come in behind him
Right.
and let up what he's teaching. Doesn't it give you a great contrast now?
Right, it does. And he's aware of that, and that's why he was so concerned about the response that they had made to that letter, because it could have put them in the position of saying, well, if that's how he feels, I don't want to have anything to do with him. You know, Nixon. We find that Paul prayed, he pleaded with the Lord. He's very intent on pleading that this thorn be removed. It was something very unpleasant, and he wanted it to be removed, but he did not get the answer that he wanted. The Lord told him, he says, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. And so the answer was, no, I'm not going to remove it. This is something you're going to have to suffer. But remember, I'm with you. My grace is sufficient. I'll see you through. So whatever we have by way of struggles, that ought to be our attitude. That with God and Christ and the Holy Spirit on our side, we can go through anything. They're there to support us, and God's not going to allow us to be overwhelmed to where we cannot survive and get through whatever the temptation or trial is.
God knew that Jonah could stand that test, and he knew that Paul could stand the thorn in the flesh test that he was facing.
Yeah.
I think he knew that they could both withstand it.
Right. Well, I don't know about you. I have had several things that have caused an extreme amount of pain. I've had about 8 kidney stones, and that's a lot of pain if you've ever had one. Probably one of the most intense pains that I ever had was when I had this bulging disc between my fifth and sixth cervical, and it was actually paralyzing my left arm, but it was against the nerve that was going down my left arm, and they had to do an MRI, and I had to have a closed MRI. And if you've ever had one of those, it's not very pleasant at all. They put this shield over you, but you have to lay and put your head back. Well, I had been sleeping for several months in a chair with my head leaned forward because I couldn't stand to put my neck back because it put pressure on that nerve. And there was 45 minutes in that MRI, and I thought, man. But you know what I thought about? I said, this is nothing compared to what Jesus suffered on the cross. This is nothing compared to what he went through. And that's exactly what I thought as I went through that. I can do this. Pardon? Oh, well, I would have it had it not been in pain. But anyway, uh, that is, to me, that's exactly what Paul came to understand here. Whatever he went through was nothing compared to what Jesus went through. And God's saying, my grace is sufficient. I'll see you through. And it's when you're weak and when you're having these disabilities that my strength is going to come through. What you can do in a spiritual sense, in a spiritual way, by what you're doing, shows the power of God. It's not on the basis of you physically and what you're able to do. It's what God can do through you and even through your weaknesses.
We're spiritually than physically.
Right, 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 right. And of course, he's already talked about, this physical, describing it as a tent, and it's a temporary, and it's going to decay. But at the same time, the spiritual self is growing stronger. That's the picture that we have, and certainly that comes through here as well. He goes on. He says, "Therefore, most gladly I will rather boast in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me." And so uh, he says, I'm thankful that I can share in the sufferings of Christ, and I'm doing this for you. That's basically what he's trying to get them to see. He says, "Therefore I take pleasure in infirmities and reproaches and needs, in persecutions and distresses for Christ's sake. For when I'm weak, then I am strong." What a tremendous attitude that comes through for us as far as Paul's concerned. Okay, verse 11, he says, "I have become a fool in boasting. You have compelled me, for I ought to have been commended by you, for in nothing was I behind the most eminent apostles, though I am nothing." And so here, he's saying, I shouldn't have had to go through this at all. You knew of my work in the Lord. You were the ones that I preached to. You saw the power of the Holy Spirit working in me. There were miracles that were performed in your presence. Signs and wonders were performed to shore up your faith, to establish your faith. You were recipients of the gifts of the Holy Spirit, which they had all of them, apparently, from 1 Corinthians uh, 12, 13, 14, where he's talking about the use of the spiritual gift. It was apparent that they had all of them. And they received it at the hands of Paul. So there should have been no questions in their mind at all. And yet, that's how Satan works to deceive, isn't it? You plant a lie, you make an accusation against someone, even like Paul, and guess what? Some people are going to believe it. Some people are going to believe it. And that's exactly what had happened here. And he's conscious of that. He said, "Truly the signs of an apostle were accomplished among you with all perseverance in signs, wonders, and mighty deeds." He says, "For what is it in which you were inferior to other churches?" In other words, did you like anything? Did you come behind any other congregation that's been established that I established? Not at all. Not at all. He says, "Except that I myself was not burdensome to you, forgive me this wrong." So the difference was that he preached to them at no charge to himself whatsoever, completely free of charge. And then he even says, "Was this wrong? Forgive me if this was wrong." Uh, you, we've talked about this being a very intimate book, showing the feelings of Paul, and this comes through. This is one of those times right there. He's saying, you should have been commending me. You should have withstood all these false rumors and reports. You should have stood up for me and said, "No, this is not true." And yet, evidently, not all of them did that. And he's hurt. You can tell it. And he says, "Now for the third time, I'm ready to come to you, and I will not be burdensome to you. For I do not seek yours, but you. For the children ought not to lay up for the parents, but the parents for the children." So he's saying, "I'm coming to you again, and it's not going to be at your expense. I'm not going to charge you. I don't want anything from you." He says, "I don't want your money. I want you." He wants their support. He wants their love. And then he makes the point: the children ought not to lay up for the parents, but the parents for the children. And we all get that, don't we? And that's the kind of way we live. I kind of wish my kids would lay up for me, but they don't. No, I'm just kidding. We're always here as parents to help our kids, no matter how old they are. They're still our children. When they have a need, if we're capable, we're going to try to fill that need. He says, I will very gladly spend and be spent for your soul. Though the more abundantly I love you, the less I'm loved. There again, you see his feelings coming through. You know, he says, I'm glad that I can give myself, you know, everything I am, I'm giving for your sakes. But it appears the more I give, the less I'm loved. You don't appreciate it. And isn't that one of the things that hurts us more as much as anything? To be unappreciated, to do something, go above and beyond, and there's no recognition given, there's no response of any kind of gratitude, whether it's coming from our children, our mates, or our friends, or whatever. Wendell?
Yeah, but there's a sort of an opposite of that. In fact, that people do things for people and maybe masses of people, and they don't want accolades and that kind of stuff. It was something within that made them do that,
Right.
and they don't really want recognition for it.
No. Well, even Christ said, you know, if you just give to receive back from someone, what have you gained? You're to be like God, who gives to both the good and the bad, and this sort of thing. And in our lives, that's true. We don't do things from the motivation of wanting a reward. A reward is different than appreciation, though. You know, uh, I think appreciation just has to do with a validation of what you've done.
He says, the more abundantly I love you, the less I'll be loved. I think you don't need to confuse. He's not looking for praise
No.
in that. He's looking for respect. And
Right.
and the fact that what he's doing, the extent that he's going to give them the most valuable thing known to man,
Right.
which is an opportunity to be saved. He's not wanting to be praised and held above,
No.
but he would like them to reciprocate in a show of appreciation.
Right.
And you know, now like Linda's saying, you know, you can get out here and you can do enough. If you've got enough, you can make a big show of it. But at that point, if you want something for that, you're looking for praise.
Right.
Paul wasn't looking for
No.
praise. And I think there is a difference there.
Absolutely. Right. Right.
It's just to know who I am and let me do my job above.
Right.
And he's wanting them to understand why he's doing what.
Right. Exactly. We'll stop there and pick up. We'll pick up with verse 14. There's kind of a break there, and that's where we'll begin next Lord Day, Lord willing, and we'll complete the book probably. Don't know whether we'll have time to introduce the book of Galatians or not. We might. So in your study, you might want to go ahead and be starting that book.